So my name is Beth Kerr. I'm the Group Director for Wellbeing at Cognita. Cognita is a global schools group. We have 78 schools in 10 different countries, all with very unique populations, and they very much serve their local population. I started my career as a teacher, a PE teacher, taught biology, PSHE, a bit of English, and before I joined Cognita, I had been a senior deputy in a large through school in Hertfordshire. And so my role now, and I'm very fortunate to do my role because I moved from being a pastoral leader to actually looking after the pastoral welfare of, I think we have about 50,000 children, so it's quite a lot of responsibility. And so it's really just about really having that united, shared vision around well-being, trying to harness the sort of power of working in a schools group where you have so many amazing colleagues doing great things, just pulling them together to really make sure that well-being is the number one priority, which it is for us. So look, it's not an add-on. I think that's the first thing to sort of appreciate. It's an integral part of educating and parenting for life, not just for school or at home. So sooner that we get across that it's really the foundation of learning. And I think sometimes, you just think, oh, well, you've either got it or you haven't, socially and emotionally, some children seem to thrive and some don't, but there are things that we can do, and having those sort of conversations about it, the earlier the better. I think it's important to, sometimes one of the things that I worry is that parents particularly, there's so much pressure on parents who worry about things, and actually if you strip it back and go back to having fun with your child, and then you're building this solid relationship, and from that social and emotional well-being will happen, and that those conversations around it will be and will feel more natural. So I think I would say have fun, be natural, role model, explain. Sometimes you might not feel fantastic, or you might have got cross about something. Start articulating those feelings from a young age. Children are really perceptive, and they pick up and they can understand. So I think you're trying to put a language to describe the feelings, and obviously as you get older, that language will vary, and you might even end up texting it to your teenager. But I think it's important to build a culture of being open and sharing. We know that in every setting, talking helps. So the earlier you can model that in your schools, in your homes, and being really positive about it, then you are really establishing those solid roots that will help your students as they get older. So if you're thinking about adolescence, and actually all children to a degree, if we start reframing the topic of communication, so instead of it being like this, like some sort of therapy where you're talking about it, which it can be a bit intense, especially for children, so start reframing and thinking it's not just about talking, it's about behaviour, it's about understanding your child. What does that behaviour tend to mean? So you may get if we look at teenagers who particularly you might have to become adept at reading what their body language means, what their actions mean. So if you ask your child, how are you feeling? You may get a grunt. How's school? Fine. If that grunt is associated, then they say, well, I'm fine, and what's for tea, mum? Okay, you might think, okay, that's a fine, school is okay. If it's a fine and then they go and slam the door, you think, oh, maybe something didn't go wrong. If they say fine and then go home, slam the door, and then you don't see them all evening, you know that perhaps there's something really wrong. So it's about starting to, as a parent and as a teacher, knowing and understanding your child. And that is true, as I said, in the classroom and at home. So as soon as you can start giving credence to other ways of communicating, I think you're on a better path to understand children and to have those sort of dialogues with them. I think I would also say that every child, and this is not very easy, but every child has different ways of communicating. You have the super chatty ones, you have the sort of quieter ones. It doesn't mean that one style is better than the other. And to make it even harder, it does tend to change over age. over time rather. But if you think, try to understand and recognise how certain children like to communicate, then really try to pick up if there's a change. And I don't mean a change that you would naturally expect to see as they grow older. I mean quite a sudden change. So they've gone from being really quite a quiet, shy child to being louder than life and larger than life, or vice versa. So start thinking about those things. I think sometimes try to, again, lead by example. It's really important that children see you saying, oh, I feel that give it, start building that vocabulary up from a young age. Because obviously when you're talking, we have children from very early age, from 18 months all the way up, so they can't communicate verbally, but of course, if they're crying, perhaps they're hungry or they're tired or whatever. So starting to pick up those cues and understanding that technique is quite a helpful one all through their life, if you like. I would say one of the best ways to really improve that communication is to make opportunities that aren't this forced, sitting down, how was your day, darling? I don't know if it's just my children, but that never really works. They tell me nothing. Whereas if we are walking the dog or kicking a ball around or cooking or whatever it is, it's not as intense, and it's much more likely that they might then share. I'm thinking about sort of slightly more open-ended questions rather than really direct, the how was your day, questions, being a bit more imaginative about that. I think that for teenagers and young people, it's reassuring for parents and teachers to understand that is a really important time for adolescents to be seeking independence, this individuation process where they are becoming, young adults. They are bound and they should be moving away from you a little bit, and they should be forming strong friendships and strong, a real, they want their peer approval, and that is what's important to them. And so that's okay. Don't see it as a threat. Just see it as a phase that they will go through. You are there stable. You are there, try not to react in a teenager way with them, which is really hard to do sometimes because they can be very challenging, and you see you have your inner teenager wanting to respond, but you try and step back from that. I would also say not to dismiss the mode of communication that they favour. They're always using their devices to communicate, be it on Snapchat or Instagram, or and sometimes I think adults can be a little bit sniffy about those sorts of ways of communicating. And so I don't mean over dinner, that's not right, but if your child sometimes wants to text you, that's okay, because it might be that might be the first way that they disclose that something's not quite right, or they're feeling a bit unhappy. So reframe it, lead by example, and don't be afraid of using other types of communication. I think that I actually think there are pressures everywhere. There are different pressures, but for sure that there is this sort of common entrance pressure seems really acute in London, possibly just because there are more independent schools in London, so you can't get very far without that conversation. Now, I think that one of the things to call out is that parental guilt and worry is really high. Those WhatsApp groups, those parent WhatsApp groups, they're just a source of stress. You think you're doing a good job, and then you'll check and somebody's posted this amazing model that they did for school, and oh gosh, mine's rubbish, and you as an adult are going through exactly the same as teenagers go through when they're comparing themselves. So I think I'd say one of the things would be to step away from those sorts of whole school groups that are a bit stress inducing, and just trust your nearest and dearest to sort of assess whether you're on the right lines, and trust yourself as well a little bit. I think that one of the things that's really important to recognise is that success now is being redefined, and maybe this generation of children are in a difficult position because they're sort of in between, where absolutely it was GCSEs and A-levels, and now there's a recognition that we need more. So we look at the skills that the World Economic Forum talk about, and they're not just the ability to learn something by rote or to be able to pass exams. They're wider than that, and unfortunately you can't really tutor those skills. You can't really teach. It's not something, resilience and creativity, and you can't sit down and say, off you go, and this is resilience, go and do it. It's through lived experiences, and some of those lived experiences are compromised when there's pressure to study exams, because sometimes some of the things that parents say, well, we'll stop this club and that club and this club and that club because you need to do your tutoring. Well, you are naturally then just taking away that perfect opportunity to develop those skills. And, it's understandable, but I think that you have to have faith in your child and in wanting a sort of broader, more rounded child. I think it's really important to sort of think, you don't want your child to peak at 11. It's not all over at 11, okay, or 12, 10, or whenever they're doing the exam. And actually, to say that into GCSE and A-level, you do not want a child to be so burnt out when they've left 16 that they never want to learn again. You want a child who's curious and interested, because those are the skills that will better prepare them for life. And so, yeah, I would say that, it is incumbent upon us as parents to step back a little bit, because that pressure, kids pick up on it, and even if you think that your child's not listening to you, or your child doesn't really care what you think, they absolutely will care, and they will pick up on things that you didn't think they heard. They'll be on top of the stairs when you're talking to your husband, and they will pick up something, and they will sense your disappointment if there's any sniff that you measure their value based on whether they do or don't get into school. And so it's hard for adults to accept rejection, I think. And so, at a time where they're trying to sort of identify who they are, I really think it could not be any more important to just have some sense of perspective and be pragmatic. And yes, of course you want your children to work hard, and yes, you want them to get into that school because it's a good school, and that's fantastic. But if they don't get into school, that's okay. And maybe have those conversations with the child beforehand, because they're going to be thinking, oh, what if I don't get into the school? Mummy, daddy, have the chat with them, saying, okay, if you don't get into that school, we'll get into this school, or we'll get into that school. And I think there's also, sometimes for all of us in this sort of treadmill and road race that you're on, actually taking a bit of time with your child to step back and think, you know what, we're really pretty lucky. That sense of pragmatism and gratitude for what you've got, and you get that by practicing it, by actually consciously spending 2 or 3 minutes a day thinking of people who are worse off than you and with your child, so that then not getting into that school, not doing so well, it's not quite as important. So I think have faith in your job as a parent is to produce this rounded child that when they leave school, they'll be able to cope with all different balls. They won't get that if they're just straitjacketed into passing exams. And I think the damage you can do to children's self-confidence by not achieving those goals at a young age is significant. So yeah, I'm not saying that it's not important to study hard, and of course it is. It's just getting the balance, and sometimes we have to check ourselves to think, is this my child? I know my child. Trust yourself. You know your child. Just take a step back and think of the bigger picture. And remember, you don't want them to peak at 11. No, yeah, I think it would be better if you looked at them as individuals. I think there are some. I think in terms of well-being for girls and boys, no, we want the same, you want that same ambition for them. In terms of things that they may be more prone to or vulnerable to, there are perhaps some differences, but it doesn't mean that so if we look at eating disorders, okay, there is a higher percentage of girls that suffer from eating disorders, but it doesn't mean that boys don't. So you wouldn't want to be reassured by that and then not even look at it for your son. So I think if you look at children as individuals, you're far more likely, if you look at a class, you're far more likely to see differences within individuals than you are between, certain groups. So no, I don't think there's a sort of set thing, although there are some, when we look at social media and technology rather, I would say the evidence shows that girls perhaps are more susceptible to some of the negative impacts of social media, and boys tend to gain more. But that's really general, and when it's your child, it's not general, it's your child. And so being aware and open to both, I think, is probably wise. Yeah, it's a really good question. I think I wouldn't sleepwalk into it. I wouldn't think, oh, it's all going to be fine. In the same way you wouldn't dream of doing that when your child passes their driving test. You don't just give them the keys to the car and say, okay, off you go, dear. If there's anything like my parents say, you don't drive at night over a certain time, you don't have so many people in the car, you obviously don't drink and drive, you make sure you fill it with petrol, you don't litter, you have a set of rules. So, your mobile devices are just the same. So I think if you have that in mind from the beginning, if you inform yourself about the general principles of what the device is doing, and you're looking at your child's developmental age and stage. So if you're looking at an adolescent, let's say, although I appreciate that technology use and mobile devices certainly have got younger and younger. But if we look at adolescents, there are three main things that you're looking at. Number one, their prefrontal cortex is still developing. So their emotional part, the limbic system, is more powerful than their sensible, rational, that sort of side of the brain that can make sensible decisions. So there's a chance that they may go with their emotions rather than their sort of sensible part of as they're getting older. The second thing is they've got all these neurons that have not yet been fused together. So it's an amazing time to learn a new skill, which is why I guess they're at school. And so if they are spending huge amounts of time on social media, then it's not so much what they're doing there, it's more that they're neglecting this great opportunity to learn something. Because if you've ever tried to learn a sport as an adult, it's really hard. I tried to learn to ski as an adult, it was really difficult. So it's just a precious time. So, use that golden time wisely. And the third thing we know is that they're hugely influenced by friends, peers, and so you have to, and often friends and peers are really great influences, but sometimes they're not. And so it's about having a balance. So if you're thinking of those three things, you've got a fair idea where your child's brain is at. You've got a fair idea what are the positive things that your child needs. So we have a Be Well charter, and the idea of it is, it's just here, but the idea of it is, just for you to see, that it's looking at what things contribute to well-being, what things do you need to put in. So instead of starting the conversation off about mobile phones, talking about the negative, don't do this, you're not allowed to have it for so many times, all those sorts of conversations that invariably go badly with teenagers. If you start off by saying, okay, well, you need sleep, diet and exercise, and connecting, doing and giving. Those things are must put in, if you like, in your daily life. Now, children generally are quite accepting of things that have evidence and research behind them. So the evidence for sleep is massive. It's absolutely conclusive how important sleep is for all sorts of things, the concentration, the relationships, emotional, physical health, etc. You can show them that, and you can say, look, because sleep is so important, we're not going to have devices in the bedroom because that impacts it. Okay, so fine. So then you've got rid of that one with an argument that is more about sleep than about device time. You then said, look, it's really important that you connect and you keep up your clubs. So if you start by putting those things in, almost by default, it won't have quite as much of an impact. And I think sometimes the other thing to say is that when you can't look at it as some whole, technology is awful. It's the context. There's so many amazing things that kids can use technology for. So separate the context, and scrolling for hours on end and looking at pictures of unattainable models, that's not great for your mental health. We all do it a little bit, it's fine. But if your child is spending hours and hours doing that, in the same way they're spending hours and hours and hours gaming, you could think, okay, well, maybe we've got the balance wrong. I think the last thing to say is, parents have somehow been persuaded that they don't know enough, that oh gosh, everything's changed. Well, actually, I would imagine that the hopes, the values, the aspirations that parents have for their children have not changed from 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. They still want the same things. And so just hold on to that and have faith in yourself, because I think often you doubt yourself as a parent. You think, oh, I'm going to traumatize them if they don't have this latest, game or whatever it is. And and you really do, you doubt yourself and you allow yourself to go against your gut instinct. So remember, no one knows that child better than you do. So trust your instinct, do what's best, but start with the positive, and then hopefully it will not impact in quite the same way. There are really great organisations, Common Sense Media is one we use a lot, and that's really helpful just to keep you on top of things. But don't get yourself tied up in knots that you have to know the latest about TikTok, because as soon as you've got the hang of that, there'll be something else. So it's a bit of a moving tread, but you're much better off having a general idea about the principles of all these games rather than the nuanced ins and outs of them. And sometimes, you just try to look cool by being, and that's disastrous as well. So I would stay clear from that. So yes, absolutely. We actually have entered into a relationship with AS Tracking, and we are working to install a global rollout in all our schools. We're currently looking to translate it into different languages. I think some of the reasons that we like it is that it's very much an evidence-based well-being tool, if you like. It really has a key impact. Now, it's a proactive pastoral approach. So there are lots of really good well-being assessments and tools, and it's not to denigrate any of the other ones, because they all serve a purpose. And AS Tracking and us, we very much feel it's a part of the jigsaw. There's no magic silver bullet that improves all child well-being, but it's a part. But of course, the more parts of the jigsaw that you get, the better. So what we particularly like is that there's a lot of pressure on teachers. You're wearing a million hats, and with the increase in mental health conditions, you now almost feel you have to play a clinical role, and actually that is not right. We're not qualified to do that, and we can't do that essentially. Whereas the good thing with AS Tracking is that it identifies biases in natural biases in students, and then it looks, okay, well, if you have this bias, so let's say you're looking at Year 9 girls and they have a bias to be completely trusting of other people. You then start thinking, okay, well, what risks does that pose? Well, maybe that poses a risk that they may be more likely to be taken advantage of online or whatever else. And then as a classroom, as a teacher, you can just make minor modifications, things you say, so these are educational interventions. They're not clinical interventions. I'm not sitting down talking about, really serious matters, but there are little differences I can make to my educational practice, little questions that we can put in our PSHE lessons that can just steer a child in the right direction. So I think we really particularly like the fact they're educational and pastoral interventions rather than clinical. We've been really lucky because we've worked very closely with them to align our Be Well chart and strategy with AS Tracking. So when we're saying to the children, it's really important that you sleep, diet, exercise, connecting, doing, giving, we can look at children who have healthy biases, why they might be more likely to make sensible choices about sleep or exercise or diet. So that's been wonderful. And obviously for a schools group, it's, if you can't measure, and it's always been a difficult question when you're looking at measuring well-being, because it's not some sort of quantitative number. And actually that with AS Tracking, we're not looking at getting the numbers down that the AS Tracking pick up. If anything, the more numbers the better. It means you're making more of an impact. But you can't measure whether you're getting better at your pastoral care if you don't have any idea where you started off from. So I think we can look then as a schools group, and we can look at trends, and we can see, actually, gosh, this is it's a real global trend. What can we do as a group to put more support or provision? Or it might be a trend that starts in Asia, and then we see it travel to Latin America, and then when it comes to Europe, we're actually a little bit ahead of the curve. And so it's very much one piece of the jigsaw. We look at individuals or whole cohort data, and just try to steer that adjective of steering is really apt. And so yeah, we've been delighted with it, and we're really excited to roll it out. Well, again, I think it's a little bit like the sort of quote I said earlier on, is that you have to take a step back. First of all, you think, what things are really important for my child? Right? Those things, the contributors' well-being, are critical. So it is no good cancelling every club and putting, because the message, even if you're saying to your child, oh, it's fine, mummy doesn't care about the exam results, but you're not going to football or anything else for the next 6 months, well, your actions are not really mirroring what you're saying. And the child will say, well, clearly it is really important because. And so I think, really remember that the key things that are important, and do not neglect those things, because they are critical. They will be critical. And I would say that that period of around the Common Entrance exam, that's when interest really develops. So, you see children, they've always quite liked art, and now they really are getting into it. Yeah. So if you take it away from them, they might never pick it up again, because when you come to the teenage years, you're going to have all those competitor or the interest with the friends and the peers and other interests. So you might have really pulled the plug on that, and you'll be sorry, because having passions is a really protective factor for children. You think of all the children, usually your head boy and head girl they do a million different things. They've got a million different interests, and interest is such a protective factor for children. So I think I would also, as I said, be mindful of your language and actions. And so even if you think you're being totally nonchalant, you might not be. And you almost have to practice that face. And, you didn't, never mind, practice that face in the mirror. And as I said, there has to be some perspective and pragmatism and looking at the bigger picture. And if you start by thinking, where do I want my child when they're 25 or 35 or whatever, most parents would say, I want them to be happy in something that they enjoy. It's not about, it's not all over at 11, it really isn't. And so if they didn't get in, or if it's a real battle, then maybe you're pushing too hard. Or maybe if they're finding it dull, maybe you're pushing hard enough. But listen to your child and take a step back. And I would say sometimes that means taking a step back from being around groups of people who are all in the same boat as you, because that can, increase your stress more. And enjoy your child. Children are there. They're a wonderful a gift, and I think that undue pressure. There's normal pressure and stress, and children are very good at managing it. But the message must be: you are not the product of this exam result. You are far, far more than that, because that's a message they will take with them and use to measure their own self-worth throughout their life. That's it. Well, I think the hardest thing, you've just hit the nail on the head there, is the uncertainty. All right, so that is something that we are not used to as parents or as teachers. We've been able to say, your assessment is going to be next week, and then your parents will say, well, yeah, and we'll know the grade, and we'll know, or your football club is next week, or we're going to see grandma, and now you don't know, and you actually don't know the answer to that. And so your whole conversations with your child, you've had to start saying, I don't know, dear. So my daughter said to me, is school going to be on tomorrow? I said, I don't know. It's on today though, so let's just go with that. So the positives are that you are living more in the moment. So the huge take up of mindfulness and all those sorts of things, well, actually we kind of have to do that now, because there's no point looking too far in the future. It changes on a daily basis. So that uncertainty can be a positive. It can mean that we really just focus in on the here and now. It can be a good way of drilling down into the things that we know are important and that we can control. So the sleep and the diet and exercise, to some degree, you can really help do those things. There's that element of showing your child that they are more than their results, or more than this and more than that. They're a whole person, and because there's so much uncertainty about the exams, and it's been a really tough, torrid time for children and young people at university. I really feel for them. There's the fact that what else can they do other than the schoolwork that you don't have? Are there ways that they can give to other people so that they are actually having to look outside themselves? Those are really great skills for anybody. And so I think it's difficult to be, you can't be sort of falsely positive, but we are where we are. We can only take a day at a time. There are lots of people that are worse off than us. You may be somebody who has lost friends and family. That's awful situation to be in. So obviously if you're in that situation, you're just taking things day at a time. But most things children are exceptionally malleable. Their brains are malleable, and they probably will cope with this better than us. And if they have us as that sort of secure foundation, if you like, and I'm talking about teachers now as well as parents, then that's the best you can do, and sometimes the best you can do is good enough. I think one of the things that we're really realising now, that the value that's placed on well-being has skyrocketed, because people are realising, well, actually you can't do anything. You can't, So it is the foundation of everything, and that's why when we're looking at our education in our schools, it comes first. It comes under all of those things. So you start with that, and if you try to teach children that well-being is not something that you either have or you're unlucky if you haven't got it. It's something you can control. You can make a difference to your well-being. Things you do, things you put in every day will strengthen your well-being. So the great thing is you're enabling young children now, which probably wouldn't have done before, to really practice those habits. So they're saying, well, I know I need to eat properly or exercise because, and they're understanding the why. And as soon as they start understanding the why, they can then start addressing the question of the how. Okay, so I know I need to exercise because it's really good for I get a release of hormones, and that makes me feel really energetic, and it's good for my heart and lungs. And then how? And I'm going to do that. Well, I can't leave my flat, so I'm going to run up and down the stairs, or I'm going to... So you're enabling them, you're giving them those skills that perhaps in our micromanaged society that we had before weren't there, you know. So they've had this, even though they freedom might be a strange word to use, but they've had more freedom to impact the things that are closer to them, and that I hope will give them this sort of, you know, creativity and strength, and those characteristics that the World Economic Forum, you know, talk about, the skills of 2030. You know, it will help them develop that, and I hope you know, give us a brighter future.